What's going on, guys? So in this video, I'm going to be taking you through my step-by-step framework for breaking through strength plateaus. So I put together this entire slideshow presentation for you. This is going to be very dense and packed with a lot of substance, a lot of key information that you're going to need to have whenever you hit a strength plateau or whenever you have issues gaining muscle and strength in your training. So this is going to be a very helpful resource and guide for you. So this is actually a chapter straight out of my Herculean bulking program. So if you guys are interested in a step-by-step process, a step-by-step system to help you pack on 16 to 18 pounds of muscle over the next 9 months, master your fitness naturally without living in the gym, without sacrificing your life, you got to check out the Herculean bulking program. The link will be in the description. So first things first, you cannot separate size and strength in natural lifters, and progressive poundages are the key driver of your gain. So if you are not seeing that rate of strength gain over time, that improvement over time on your major compound lifts, then your physique is not improving. If you haven't seen gains at all, then you haven't hit a plateau. Your training program probably just sucks, and you need to learn how to train properly and train how a drug-free lifter should. You're probably in the gym too much, or the other factors in your fitness routine aren't in good order, such as your sleep and rest or your nutrition. However, even if your training is on point, you're training as a natural lifter should, and you're following the Polarity fitness guidelines and the fundamentals, the principles of drug-free training and drug-free fitness, you will still hit plateaus, because if we could all just linearly progress past the beginner stage of training, we'd all be walking around fucking benching 1,000 pounds, which is just not going to happen. So don't freak out if you hit a strength plateau. It's normal and a part of the process. And in this video, I'm going to show you my step-by-step process for breaking through these plateaus and continuing to make consistent gains. The first thing we need to cover is what is a strength plateau. And so a strength plateau is when multiple core exercises stall out for 3 to 4 weeks, meaning that you haven't been able to add any weight or even a rep to your core compound lifts for 3 to 4 weeks. And so it's actually very common to have one of your exercises stall out for a while, but that isn't actually a real strength plateau. That's just a stall on that particular exercise. And even if you are still gaining strength on just 2 to 3 of your core compound lifts, then you are still gaining muscle, especially if these compound lifts cover a lot of muscle in your entire body. You're still going to be gaining muscle and strength. So if all of your core lifts stall, then you are not gaining muscle at all. But I'm also going to show you how to break through single exercise stalls. But this is also, keep in mind, considering that you're already following the Polarity fitness guidelines, that you're keeping your training volume dialed in, that you're focused on recovery, that you're focused on gaining strength. So keep that in mind, because the first step really, if that is not dialed in, is for you to get on a proper drug-free training protocol. So don't worry so much about the plateaus and strength, because the reality is that you're probably not hitting a plateau. You're probably just not training properly to begin with. So you'd be better off checking out a lot of my other videos and my training programs if you want to learn how to train properly as a drug-free lifter and make these consistent strength gains. But considering that you're following proper drug-free training protocols and you're following my type of routines, then this is what a strength plateau is going to mean. The next thing is that slow progress is good progress. And so I see a lot of guys coming to me telling me that they've hit a plateau, that they're not gaining strength very fast. And the reality is that any progress is good progress when you are drug-free. It's going to be slow. When you're a drug-free lifter, like beyond the beginner stage of training, progress is not going to be this linear fast thing. It's going to be up and down, and it's going to be quite slow. So keep in mind that any progress is good progress, and it's not going to happen every single week. And if you try and rush the process of gaining strength, then you're inevitably going to plateau. If you guys watch my recent video, then you heard me talk a little bit about what happens when you try and rush the process of gaining strength. There's a built-in natural cycling process that's going to force you to back off, whether that's going to be through injury or hitting a plateau, which is very common when you try and force the natural rate of adaptation that your body goes through when it comes to building muscle and strength. So also, as a general rule of thumb, the newer you are to lifting, the faster progress you're going to make and the longer you can go without hitting any strength plateaus. Something that annoys me in the fitness industry, and this is very common advice, and it's that if anyone has hit a plateau or if anyone has any issues gaining muscle and strength in general, they are usually told to increase the training. They're usually told to increase exercises, training volume, sets per muscle group, all of this crap, right? But from my experience, this has never been the case. It's almost always been a matter of subtraction and not addition. And I believe firmly that the harder it is for you to gain muscle and strength, the less training you need. So if you've hit a plateau, it will usually require you pruning things back and giving yourself more recovery, and therefore freeing up your focus and energy that could be put into gaining strength on your main exercises. It's never going to come down to diluting your focus and diluting your recovery by adding more into the equation. If you're a bodybuilder, if you're on steroids, then sure, that's going to work. But for the natural natural lifter, those training protocols are never going to work. In order to make high volume bodybuilding splits work, you need to be on steroids. That's why so many people lack results in fitness, is because so many people are trying to mimic bodybuilding routines, and that people are under the more is better mentality, when in reality, less is going to be more, because you're going to have more recovery, and therefore when you have more recovery, you're going to be able to achieve progressive poundages much easier on your lifts. So more training is rarely the answer. It's almost always going to require you pruning things back and opening up your recovery ability. So before we get into the rest of the presentation, it's important that you understand the key to a great drug-free physique. And if you've watched any of my content, you'd be very familiar with this message. And this is the bottom line. Everything else is very secondary. And once you understand this, everything else starts to make a lot more sense. So the key to building a great natural physique is to pick a handful of major compound lifts, 4 to 8 major lifts that work well for you, that you can train intensely, and that train the majority of your musculature. And you need to devote years to mastering them and getting as strong as possible at them. So this is the foundation for your muscle and strength gains, and is the key approach to adopt at any stage of your training. So almost all of the action steps that we're going to be going through in regards to breaking through strength plateaus will involve pruning things back and giving yourself more recovery. And so the reason why we need more recovery is just this definition right here. It's in order to give ourselves the ability to produce those progressive poundages, to build up that strength, and build up to moving impressive weights across a handful of lifts. Because you cannot separate size and strength when you are drug free. So the key focus is always to get stronger. It's to get stronger. It's not about doing more volume. It's not about spending more time in the gym. It's about dialing in on a handful of major lifts and just getting stronger at them over time. It's applying the basics over a longer time horizon. And the difference between being an amateur and being a professional, guys, it has nothing to do with complication. It has nothing to do with diluting your focus among so many different things. It has to do with just applying the basics over a longer time horizon than most people do. So we're going to go through this 3-step process of elimination. And this is what I found through my experience to be the most effective process for breaking through strength plateaus. And you should treat this process as a process of elimination and apply each step for a few weeks. And then if it doesn't work, move on to the next step. So these steps are also considering that you are following the Polarity fitness guidelines and following proper drug-free training principles. So if you aren't, then you haven't hit a plateau. Your training program is just crap, and it's not crafted for a drug-free lifter. If you're training 4+ days per week and you're on a high volume bodybuilding split, the first step for you is to get on a proper drug-free training plan that involves training no more than 2 to 3 days per week, emphasizing recovery and focusing on getting very strong across a handful of compound lifts. Step 1, the first thing you must do, and unfortunately, guys, this is where a lot of you are going to be stuck. And this is where most people get stuck, and it's simply to ensure that you're applying the basic package of nutrition and a good program, and a lot of rest and a lot of sleep. This is literally where almost everyone is going to get stuck, and 9 times out of 10, strength plateaus are a result of not attending to one of these factors. And you could be perfect with your training and your nutrition, but maybe you're slacking off on your rest. People think building a great physique is just about training properly. It's just about eating well. No, there is an entire package of fundamental principles that must be dialed in, that must all be applied. The reason why most people don't have great physiques is because they are unable to apply the entire package of fundamentals, the entire package of basics. A lot of people can just train properly, but they can't apply the other fundamentals. Maybe they can eat a good diet, but they can't train hard in the gym. The reality is that building a great physique, it's about applying the entire package of fundamental principles such as nutrition, training, proper rest, tracking your workouts, all these little things. Most people can't dedicate themselves to applying those for a long time horizon, right? You need to ask yourself, are you in a calorie surplus? Is your nutrition dialed in? Are you sleeping 8 to 9 hours per night? Are you following a proper drug-free training program? This is the first step. You have to ensure that you are hitting on these basics before you start worrying about whether you've hit a plateau or not. Because without these factors dialed in, then the rest of it is minutia. The rest of it is irrelevant. I want to talk a little bit about the importance of bulking or building. And many guys will come to me claiming that they've hit a plateau on their lifts, but their goal is also to stay ripped, and it's to cut year round. And this is a form of self-sabotage, because if your goal is to get lean, then you should focus on maintaining your strength, not gaining strength. You need to be bulking and eating in a calorie surplus if your goal is to gain muscle and strength. And most of you guys are just not diligent enough when it comes to tracking your calories. You think you're in a calorie surplus, but when you track your calories closely, you realize you're in a calorie deficit and not eating more than 2,000 calories in a day. And a lot of guys are like, oh, I'm a hard gainer, but the reality, most hard gainers are just under eaters. That's the truth. And so maybe you're even in a calorie surplus from Monday to Friday, and then on Saturday and Sunday, you offset the entire week by being in a calorie deficit, and then you end up in a net calorie deficit for the week and not being in a surplus, not being able to put on any muscle and strength. So the right calorie surplus, we're going to talk a little bit about that. Make sure you're hitting your required calorie intake on a daily basis and that you're in the right calorie surplus. Lean gains are essentially making tons of gains in muscle and strength, but without putting on any fat. And I am sorry to tell you guys that is drugs. Anyone promoting that idea and who lives that idea, embodies that, is on drugs. That's not going to happen. You need to put on a little bit of fat to gain significant amounts of muscle when you are drug free. So you can't eat at maintenance or in a tiny calorie surplus that in reality is probably not even a calorie surplus, right? And expect to make rapid gains. It won't happen unless you're a complete beginner or you have a ton of body fat, or of course you're on drugs, right? So the right surplus is going to be roughly 300 to 400 calories above maintenance level, and maintenance level is usually around 14 to 16 calories per pound of body weight. You need to be gaining weight. You can't just, muscle doesn't just fucking come out of thin air. Like, you need to be putting on weight, right? You should be gaining about 2 pounds per month on the scale. So make sure you're also tracking your weight and seeing how that progresses over time. And if you stop gaining weight, it's because your maintenance calories have increased, and this is why you have plateaued. So you need to adjust your calorie intake if this happens. And as you gain muscle, of course, your metabolism is going to increase because muscle mass is metabolically costly. So of course, as you're gaining muscle, you're going to need to increase the amount of food that you can eat. And this is actually a big benefit of having lots of muscle mass when you're a natural lifter, is you can eat a lot more food. That's a side note, but that's something a lot of people don't understand about training, gaining muscle mass. And so if that happens, if you stop gaining weight, then you need to obviously adjust things and start by increasing your daily caloric intake by about 200 calories per day. And most importantly, make sure you're doing a good job of tracking that, because yes, I know tracking is hard, and a lot of people find it to be a pain in the ass, but once you get in the habit of it, it's very, very simple. It's very, very simple, and it becomes very easy to, get used to the foods you kind of gravitate towards and then know their caloric value, and then you can kind of ease off tracking a little bit. But anyways, I'll save that for another video. We'll talk a little bit more about how to, track calories and be diligent with that, and how to ensure it's not pain in the ass, because I used to think it was a massive pain in the ass when I was getting started. I was like, fuck, I'm not gonna be able to do this forever. But then, you find a system, and that depends on your lifestyle. Each person is different. Next thing, the supremacy of sleep. Make sure you're sleeping enough and resting enough in general. And if you're not sleeping at least 8 hours every night and avoiding excessive physical activity outside of your weight training, then this is why you've plateaued. So make sure your goal is not to fucking run a marathon and put on 15 pounds of muscle, because the two are conflicting. That's another form of self-sabotage. So make sure you're not doing excessive physical activity outside of your weight training. I advocate lots of walking. 10 to 15,000 steps per day is great. Human beings were meant to move a lot. Of course, that's one of the keys to longevity, in my opinion, is lots of walking. Hunter-gatherer ancestors walk like 7-8 miles every day, which is equivalent to around 15,000 steps. So definitely get lots of walking in. That's not going to interfere with your training. But if you're doing tons of intense cardio, you're running, doing HIIT training, then that is obviously why you've plateaued, right? So I like to say the combination of 8 to 9 hours of sleep per night, a calorie surplus, and plenty of nutritious food is the closest thing you'll get to anabolic steroids as a natural lifter. Like, why do you think babies grow so quickly? It's because they're always sleeping. They're just sleeping and eating. That's why they grow so quickly. So if you want to gain at the quickest rate possible, you need to be focused on getting lots of sleep every night. Combine that with an excess of calories, of course, calorie surplus, and getting proper nutrition in. And it's really the recipe for success. And sleep is the glue that holds everything together. And without it, it doesn't matter how good your training and nutrition is. You will not gain muscle and strength, because as I said, building a great physique, drug-free training, and drug-free fitness, it's a package. It's not like individual things. It's a whole package you have to deliver on all the time consistently in order to, see the results that you're after. So I see a lot of guys obsessing over the minutia regarding training, nutrition. It's like they don't even care about their sleep. The sleep's an afterthought, and that's ridiculous, because sleep is honestly the most important thing. Without sleep, everything's screwed. So I'm gonna give you guys a few tips for better sleep. And I'm very much an 80-20 kind of guy, Pareto's principle, the belief that 20% of things are going to create the majority of the results. And I see a lot of self-help gurus and a lot of people spewing so much bullshit that you're never going to be able to stick to for a long period of time. It's always better to dial in on the minority of things that create the majority of the results. So I like to take an 80-20 approach with regards to, like optimization of lifestyle, sleep, nutrition, all of that. I take a very, less is more approach, just like in my training, right? So the things that I found to yield outsized returns in regards to better sleep is 1, sleep in a cold room and naked. This is extremely important. A cold room actually mimics the natural sleeping habitat of the human body, because we're we're actually meant to sleep outside, and that's how we evolved, right? So your testicles are supposed to be a tad bit colder than your body temperature for optimal functioning, and this is why they hang in a pouch outside of your body, and that's why sleeping naked is ideal. Next thing, sleep in a pitch black room. There should not be a single light on in your room. No LED lights, not even a single speck of light on your TV, nothing, right? A night light, none of that. Your phone off, nothing that can really, disturb your pineal gland's ability to secrete melatonin, which is your sleep hormone. And any sort of light, a tiny little light, is enough to disrupt your pineal gland's ability to secrete melatonin. That's why you can screw up your sleep. You won't get as much deep sleep. And so another thing, avoid electronics before going to sleep. So the blue light and electronics will impair the pineal gland's ability to secrete melatonin. So I like to put away all my screens 30 to 60 minutes before I go to sleep. And I also recommend reading a book before bed. This is a very relaxing way to finish the day and will put you to sleep very quickly. Another tip that I didn't put on here because I don't think most people are going to be able to do it, but I think is very, very, very powerful, and I don't even do it all the time because it's hard to stay consistent with, and it's to go to sleep and wake up at the same time every day. Probably like the number one lever that will improve your sleep quality and quantity of sleep. Our body operates on rhythms, right? Like your circadian rhythms. If you go to sleep at the same time every night, you're never gonna have any sleep insomnia. You're gonna be able to fall asleep super quickly. You're gonna be able to wake up and have tons of energy all effortlessly, right? But it's so, if you have like a life outside of fitness, it's kind of hard to stay consistent with over the long term. So I like to kind of dial in on these, and then for periods of time where I'm not quite as busy in my personal life, I like to dial in on that principle, especially in the winters here when there's fuck all going on in Ottawa. I like to dial in on that, and that helps a lot with productivity, output, energy, and testosterone. You know, it's funny, man. I see a lot of guys now talking about testosterone decline and all of this crap, and they're pimping supplements as the holy grail. And it's like, dude, if you want optimal testosterone levels, all you need to do is fucking sleep. Like, sleep is the number one lever to pull if you want optimal testosterone levels. The more you sleep, the more testosterone your body produces. So a lot of guys are pimping these fucking supplements. It's like, yeah, of course, like proper nutrition, proper training is important, but like, if the number one lever to pull if you want very high testosterone levels is to sleep a lot and get lots of deep sleep and dial in on these principles. Sleep hygiene is super important. It's something I optimize in my life that keeps my training going strong. Like, I just got back from vacation and my sleep was not consistent. You know, my sleep was not consistent. I was going to bed at completely different times. One night I'd be going to bed at like 2 or 3 a.m. Then the next night 10 a.m. and it's like, or 10 p.m. of course, and it screws everything up. So it's very important to have good sleep hygiene. It's one of the biggest levers you can pull that would completely change your entire life. And I'm going to make a video on this again soon. So step 2, if you've applied step 1 for a few weeks and haven't seen any improvement, which is pretty unlikely for most of you guys, then now we're going to move on to step 2. And so the next thing to do is to consider increasing recovery time between workouts and adjusting the training volume of some of your exercises. And so this will be different depending on whether you're following a 3-day routine or a 2-day routine, but here are a few different things that I like to do when I hit a plateau. So first thing I like to do is to shift to an 8-day week instead of a typical 7-day week. So that's a nice little extension of time that's going to give you another day of recovery that can really, really help when it comes to, continuing to make consistent strength gains, have lots of recovery. So if you're training twice per week, then this will give you an equal recovery time between workouts, which is cool. And if you're training 3 times per week, you'll of course still benefit from the extra day of recovery. Next thing, and you guys have heard me talk about this a lot, is to cut down on isolation exercises. So you guys have heard me talk many times about how plenty of dudes use isolation exercises really to their detriment and cut into their recovery ability and therefore their ability to gain strength on their mainstay compound lifts that will actually build their muscle and strength. Because the compound lifts, you have to see them as the substance builder. They're what's going to pack on the muscle and strength. The isolation exercises, it's detail work. It's detail work. Like, trying to focus on isolation exercises before the big compound lifts is equivalent to trying to add icing on top of the cake before the cake has even been baked. You're going to get a lot thicker and more jacked by adding 100 pounds to your deadlift than 20 pounds to your curls. So keep that in mind. A lot of guys are misprioritizing because, of course, bodybuilders can follow this protocol. They can just slap a bunch of isolation work on and they can focus on that and neglect the compound lifts and whatever. But as a natural lifter, you need to be focusing on the exercises that are going to create a system-wide metabolic effect, a growth effect throughout your entire body. That's what's going to produce physique development for drug-free lifters. So don't focus on isolations to the detriment of your strength gains on your major compound lifts. Isolation exercises are the passenger relative to the main driver of growth, which is your strength gains on the main compound lifts. So as a general guideline, if you're training twice per week, like on my basic, full body twice a week program, then don't exceed 6 total sets of isolation movements in a workout. So if you plateaued on this, then cut back even more to just 3 or 4 total sets, or even remove them altogether if you feel the need to. Everyone, as I said, is different recovery ability wise, and sometimes you're going to need to get rid of isolation exercises for a period of time. And if you're training 3 times per week, and obviously not on a full body split, because I don't recommend 3 times per week full body, don't exceed 4 total work sets of isolation movements in a workout, and again, cut back even more if you feel the need. Next thing to do is to switch over to training twice a week if you're currently training 3 times per week and have plateaued. So the extra recovery here will almost always get things moving again. And my general recommendation, and I say this in the Herculean bulking program as well, is like, hey, most of you guys are going to see much better results training twice per week because less is more. Don't assume more is better. That's something you just have to rid yourself of. Like, that's a terrible mindset to have when it comes to drug-free training. A lot of you are going to see better results with the less training, with the twice per week training. That's usually where it's at. That's what I found time and time again. I'm pretty much like, I haven't trained 3 times per week in many months now. I'll probably go back to maybe messing around with it a little bit more, but my default training recommendation is twice per week. That's what I found to be the most effective. And most of you guys are not even applying the basic fundamental principles, and therefore training 3 times per week can be overkill. It can overtrain you very easily. You have a lot more room for error with twice per week training. And so if you've plateaued and you're training twice per week, then I'd recommend switching to training 3 times every 2 weeks. And this will look like a Monday, Friday, Wednesday, Monday kind of setup, or basically where you train every 5 days. And I've done this lots and lots of times, and I find it's very helpful, especially when I've been training, maybe 6 months I've been training twice per week, and then I need to, give myself a bit more recovery to extend the lifetime gains of my cycle. And in that case, the 3 times every 2 weeks gives me a lot of benefits that I can't get with the twice per week training in regards to recovery and strength gains. And so oftentimes you'll find that applying the first step, for example, will get you moving continuously for a while, and then you'll hit another bump, and at that point you want to move on to applying steps 2 or 3 and get progress moving again, and just repeat this process until all the steps are done. And so another thing to consider, if you guys have watched one of my recent videos about sets per exercise, make sure you're also not overdoing the sets per exercise to begin with. And as I said, all of these guidelines are considering that you're following the Polarity fitness approach. If you're doing 4+ sets per exercise, then that's obviously why you're not gaining any strength. So make sure everything else is dialed in before you try and apply these. Like, don't do more than 2 to 3 sets per exercise, on pretty much every exercise that you're doing. Sometimes even 1 set per exercise can be fine, especially on isolation movements and like squats and deadlifts. So it's really, really important. Sometimes the application of just one of these steps will keep you going for months, and that's probably what's going to happen for a lot of you guys just by applying the first step of this entire presentation. Again, don't let any of this confuse you, and just remember that all these steps are pretty much for the same purpose, which is to increase your recovery, energy, and focus that you can put into gaining strength on your core compound lifts, okay? So keep in mind that we each have different lives and recovery abilities, and for some of us, we might need to prune things back a lot to allow for maximum progress in the core exercises, okay? So if none of this gets progress moving again, then move on to step 3, which we'll talk about now. But before we get into that, I actually want to quickly cover the single exercise stalls. So in this case, you won't want to change up your entire program like I just talked about. So what I like to do in this case is to perform a weight reset first, or then drop the given exercise and rotate it for a different exercise with the same movement pattern if that doesn't work. So this is a really effective process. So for example, if your squat hasn't nudged up in 3 or 4 weeks despite having applied step 1 and all the fundamental principles of drug-free physique building, then I recommend performing a weight reset on it. And for a weight reset, you'll essentially reduce the weight you're using on each of the working sets by about 5 to 10%, and then you'll take 3 to 4 weeks to slowly build back up to your previous personal best that you stalled at. And usually by the time you work back up to your previous best, you'll be able to push past it because you'll be very reset. You'll have had time to kind of recover, get form dialed in again, and then you'll be able to usually push past it. But if that doesn't work, then the best thing to do next is to drop it and replace it with an alternative. So for example, you can change from the back squat to a trap bar deadlift or a leg press. You can go from the flat bench press to the incline barbell bench press, or to a dip, or the conventional deadlift to a Romanian deadlift, or a stiff leg deadlift, a standing overhead press to a seated overhead press, etc. You guys get the point, right? So just switch to similar movement patterns, and that oftentimes will be able to make progress on that new exercise. So step 3. At this point, if none of the previous steps helped, which is extremely unlikely, your training cycle is likely run dry and it's time to reset things. So at this point, I want you to take a week off of training completely and just let your body rest. And once you're back to training, work out 2 times per week if you weren't already. Reduce your current best set poundages across your key exercises by about 5 to 10%, just like I talked about previously, and take a few weeks to work your way back up to your previous bests and then progress at your own pace. So by this point, after resetting your cycle, working back up to your best poundages, you should feel well rested and ready to cross over to new poundage territory. So you'd basically be doing the weight reset, but pretty much throughout your entire training program instead of just the one exercise on the single exercise stall case. This 3-step process of elimination is what I found to be literally the most effective thing for breaking through strength plateaus. It's incredibly effective. So follow this process step by step every time you plateau in your training. And sometimes you'll have fixed the issue by applying step 1 exclusively. And sometimes you'll need to apply all 3 steps. It really depends on where you're at and what difficulties you're having. And this is going to happen, of course, more when you're an advanced lifter. Most beginners and intermediates stall simply because of the points mentioned in step 1 regarding nutrition and rest and proper training programs, and they usually won't have to worry about the other steps quite yet. When you're more advanced, you typically have the basics dialed in more, and you just need to focus on applying the tactics that I talked about in this presentation. So final action steps. If none of this works for you, and you're sure you properly applied every step, then you're most likely an extreme hard gainer. And extreme hard gainers are those who have immense difficulty adding muscle and strength regardless of how sound their approach is. And this definitely does exist. And I'm not talking about the hard gainers who are really just under eaters and have a hard time eating in a calorie surplus. This is different. So this subset of people need to dial things back to the bare bones essentials and focus almost exclusively on the core exercises with nothing else eating into their recovery ability. So the general rule of thumb, as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, is that the harder you find it to gain muscle and strength, the less training you need to do. And this is where I'd recommend super-abbreviated routines, which is another thing I talk about in the Herculean bulking program. The Polarity fitness training routines are already abbreviated relative to conventional bodybuilding methods, conventional bodybuilding routines, but these routines can be abbreviated even more, hence the super abbreviated routines. And super abbreviated routines are pretty much at the core of all my training programs. These routines are essentially the same routines minus the isolation exercises. So this will typically consist of 3 exercise routines with just 1 to 3 sets per exercise, so very low volume. But these routines can be extremely valuable for someone who's very busy, has a laborious job, or has other reasons for having very limited recovery and time to train. So if you can't gain muscle on these routines, you simply can't gain muscle on anything. Don't get it twisted as well. It's very possible to work your entire physique with just a few exercises per workout, provided you pick the most bang for your buck movements and you're training very hard. If you're training movements that create a metabolic effect throughout your entire body, like squats, deadlifts, bench presses, overhead presses, all the multi-joint compound lifts. You don't need a lot of exercises to produce a training stimulus throughout your entire body. If you're doing just isolation exercises, then sure, it's going to take a lot of exercises to produce, development throughout your entire body. But a lot of the main compound lifts that I advocate for, just focusing on really working hard on those and getting strong at those will produce a very strong and well-developed physique, even on a very low volume approach, as long as you're training hard, So rid yourself of the idea that you need a lot of exercise to produce a well-developed physique is absolutely not true. The idea that that's not true has only become popular in recent years when bodybuilding culture exploded and everyone's on fucking steroids, right? So back in the day, they focused almost exclusively on just a handful of lifts, getting stronger at them. Lifts that produce a metabolic effect throughout your entire body, create a growth effect, an anabolic effect, These very brief routines have the potential to be extremely effective. In fact, they have the potential to be just as, if not more effective than typical abbreviated routines, especially, as I said, if you're caught in circumstances that limit recovery ability and you don't have as much time to train. So we're cutting things back to the bare bones essentials here in order to give you the recovery necessary to achieve progressive poundages on your core compound lifts. And this is basically the final resort. And I do think everyone at one point or another, regardless of plateaus or inability to gain muscle and strength, should try an abbreviated routine, because you'd be surprised how insane of gains you can see on these routines. It's absolutely nuts, because especially if you're training the right exercises, they will carry over into other exercises as well. So you don't have to worry about the lack of exercise selection. As I said, the main circumstances where this routine can come in handy are as follows. So for extending the lifetime gains of the primary routines and breaking through a plateau. So once a routine has run dry of gains, drop everything but the absolute essentials, the core lifts, and you'll continue to milk out gains from an otherwise finished routine due to the extra recovery. And so for extreme hard gainers, this kind of routine might be the way to go from day one until a significant muscle and strength base has been built, and then a more rounded routine can be used. And also for people with very little time to train, you can stimulate a ton of growth in the little time it takes to finish these workouts. Maybe you have a crazy work period coming up, you're very busy, maybe you just had a kid, a newborn, or for whatever reason it might be. You might also be on vacation. This is basically how I trained when I was on vacation, just very abbreviated routines, focused on the minimum effective dose in order to spend minimal time in the gym and continue to still make great gains. So here's what a super abbreviated routine would look like in the Polarity Fitness case. So you can train twice per week, Monday, Friday, or Monday, Thursday, or you could do 3 times every 2 weeks, like a Monday, Friday, Wednesday, Monday, for the extra recovery if you need it. So, workout A could be some barbell back squats, just a couple sets, a top set, a back off set, some weighted dips or bench, some weighted chin-ups, conventional deadlift on the next workout, some overhead press and some rows. And this is basically hitting on all the fundamental movement patterns that you need to build a very well-developed physique. And trust me, if you devote time to just mastering these exercises in that low-volume approach, just getting as strong as possible at them, working hard, you can build one hell of a fucking physique, guys. Do not get it twisted, okay? Do not get it twisted. That's it for this video, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed this very dense presentation. There's a ton of information in here that you guys can always come back and reference whenever you need it, whenever you're having trouble gaining strength or muscle, because this isn't really even just for plateaus. This is just in general. If you're struggling to gain muscle and strength, you can always come back here, reference the fundamentals, reference the things that you need to know in order to get the progress moving again. Maybe you stepped out of training for a while and you kind of lost touch with things. This will get you right back on track. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. As I said, this is a complete chapter out of my Herculean bulking program. So if you guys are interested in a full step-by-step system to help you pack on muscle and strength naturally without living in the gym and sacrificing your life, then you got to check out the Herculean bulking program. It's my masterclass designed to help you gain 16, 18 pounds of muscle. And it's extremely effective. I'll also be in the Facebook community in there if you guys want. You guys can actually join the Facebook community, the Polarity Fitness group, and you can have closer contact with me there because it's hard for me to answer all the comments consistently. So definitely check that out if you're interested. The link will be in the description. Of course, if you guys just want to pick up my free 13-point natural muscle building checklist, that covers the 13 fundamentals of drug-free physique building, which is a very handy checklist to have. As I said, if you need a reference, if you need a quick reference that's going to tell you basically what to do to build your dream natural physique, that's a very helpful guide. You can get it for free and I'll send it over to you, and we'll talk soon. Peace.